came on it. It was when I
No, it wasn't one that did your name.
It's when I could read it.
Yeah, it was the plain one. They took it. Yep. And it was one of those short ones, you know. And because I knew the girl that was helping me went out there to pick them up. I said, we got signs. And somebody else told me, said somebody that was taking signs too out there.
Take
All right.
time?
Mm-hmm. Somebody took a sign, but my open house sign.
Really?
My loaner, my son.
Mm-hmm. She told me her signs, and one of them was missing when we went to get it.
My best sign story. You ever heard of a band called Keller Williams?
Mm-hmm.
They play a lot of college campuses
Really?
all over the country. And Linda Fair, who is now the operating principal of the carry office, she and I were the first two agents to hang on since the Raleigh office. And when she was an agent, she had a couple of listings down here in NC State. And certain times of the year, all of a sudden her sign was service. It turned out anytime the band came to town, students were taking the signs and holding them up in the audience.
There's been popular.
Yes.
Wow.
No relation, no relation. All right, so, good morning.
Good morning.
I don't know about y'all, but I'm exhausted. I was laying sod all weekend long, so I'm kind of sore. But also, I didn't get much sleep because I was thinking all night long about this topic. Of all the things that are involved in a real estate transaction, personally, this is my favorite. If I could do anything else real estate related and only do that one thing, that would be it. Okay? So I have a lot of passion for it. A lot of times when my wife and I work in contracts, and she puts it in a contract, it's she hands me, once the buyer wants to put it in a contract, the seller has an offer on it, she typically turns it over to me because this is what my passion is. Okay? So we're going to talk a lot about how to be successful at negotiating win-win. And what you'll hear is a lot of this we can get out of the money. Okay, quite frankly. So today's session is negotiate win-win agreements. If that's not the book that you've got, get to that section, section 11, and let's get started. Any on our checkpoint? Any great stories this week for checkpoint? Any successes that you've had?
I had a good day. I'm trying to cut this off.
Okay. So tell me about that good day. What happened?
I had a good day at the open house. I had quite a few people through. They was coming in like Joe's. I said, oh, wow. And some people, you know, everybody liked the house, but they couldn't afford the house. And one couple, they really wanted the house. But what happened, he said he would write today, just changed jobs, and had not been on his job but a month. And then when he changed job, it wasn't the same
type of work.
Mm-hmm. So that killed it. We worked with him.
Good.
And,
Did they say how long it would take to get them approved?
6 months, at least 6 months.
Okay.
They need 6 months because the wife, she did hair at her home, and she only been at the saloon for 9 months, so she had to file income tax. So.
But it's fill the pipeline. I mean, enough of those people fill the pipeline, and month after month, someone would start getting.
And the neighbor across the street, he brought in a lot of people because I had told him Saturday, I said, look, pick your neighbor. I remember that.
Good point.
He brought his friends over and showed and said, man, you need to buy this, you know. And this one guy, he took time to look, so we'll follow up with him.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So if you add some people to that base,
I asked him, I got to add, I didn't get the news last night to add.
you're going to add today.
When we leave here on the inspection at my
Follow that
And follow
process.
up with them, right?
Yes.
Remember that was one of the seven levels.
today. I
Follow up immediately.
wrote it so I could show it to you.
Good for you.
All right. Totally.
Hey, Sandra.
All right, so let's start talking about getting our head in the game. Here's the thing about negotiating win-win agreements. Too many people put an emphasis on I've got to win. Real estate is a very, very simple business. All right, if you find out people that want to buy and sell real estate, you can make all the kind of money in this business that you want. Okay, it's not always an easy business because sometimes the other agents get in our way. Sometimes the clients get in our way, and quite frankly, what I've experienced is a lot of time we get in our own way, okay? Because it's more, some personalities, me being a high D, it's about win, be number one, got to get this next deal on the plate. I mean, sometimes I tend to move too fast instead of stepping back and saying to myself, okay, really what's supposed to happen here? Who do I represent? Who needs to make those decisions? How do I guide them to get what they want? Okay, even if it's not what I would want for them, what is it they want? Okay, so sometimes we got to step back and remind ourselves why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, so a lot of times it's us that gets in our way. We're going to talk some more about that when it comes to negotiating these transactions. But what Chris Silver says is basically, don't put yourself in the equation like gasoline on a fire. Just be the messengers. Okay, keep your opinions and emotions out of it. If a buyer wants to make an offer, it's because they want to buy the property. And obviously the seller wants to sell the house. So make sure that you simply facilitate the transaction for them. A lot of times, you as an agent needs to get out of your own way. Okay? So remind yourself when you start doing, really negotiating win-win is about stepping back and thinking, they're at point A, we're at point B, how do we bridge that gap? Okay? Whether that's you and the other agent, whether that's their client and your client, how do we bridge that gap? That's what the focus has to be when you go into this. So today what we're going to learn is some of the most common points of negotiation. We're going to walk through the 3P approach to the negotiation process. Practice planning some strategy and crafting some communication. In other words, what kind of conversations do you have between you and the co-op agent that might bring that negotiation closer to the point where the seller and the buyer are on the same terms? And then talk about some techniques that will minimize the risk involved in the transaction. All right? So let's start with the affirmation for today. Whether you want to stand up or not stand up, I'll let you stand up. All right, so here's our affirmation for the day. I tune into the needs of those around me and find solutions that work. Let's do that 3 times.
I tune into the needs of those around me and find solutions that work. I tune into the needs of those around me and find solutions that work. I tune into the needs of those around me and find solutions that work.
Awesome, great. Let's get started. All right, so what are some of the common points of negotiation? What do you think? Just name them all. They're probably going to give us price, terms. All right, so usually it's price and terms. All right? So price is pretty straightforward. It's either high enough or low enough. But what are some of the terms that you can get involved in? Repairs.
Closing costs.
Closing costs. Time of closing.
Due diligence.
Due diligence, period, or fee. Okay? Earnest money. It's anything involved in the contract that one side or the other may have differing need or want their opinion of. Is basically what it boils down to. So, but typically what we're dealing with is mostly price. Okay, that's the first element point. And then the biggest thing once you're under a contract is usually the repair negotiations, right? Okay. All right. So let's talk about some of these. I am going to kind of go off script, but all of these kind of play into one another. In other words, a negotiation is about I give a little, you give a little. Okay? If you want win-win transactions. If you don't, what's going to be is I have to win on price and I have to win on this other thing, and it's this conflict between agent and agent, client and client. Okay? So the concept is, generally speaking, just logically, the concept is you can have everything that you want if I get some of what I want. In other words, if you want a reduction in price, then what I want is to pay less closing costs for your buyer. See that concept? It's whatever you want, I'm going to have a counter back. If I'm going to give you that, this is what I need to have to make it right for my client. Right? And that's the approach that needs to happen. So what I'm going to say is up front, here's typically what I would advise you. Never write the offer before you talk to the other agent. If you're representing the buyer, do not write the offer before you have a conversation with the other agent. And here's why I'm saying that. is typically what I'll do is when my client says, we're ready to write an offer on this house, I go, great. Sheila's going to run some numbers. We're going to make sure that we're in the right ballpark in terms of what price we're going to offer. We don't want to go in too low and upset the seller. We don't want to go in too high and do overpay for the house. Does that make sense? So let's do a little investigation first. While Sheila's running the numbers, I'm going to talk to the other agent on the other side. Because what I want to do is, the key to the negotiation is, the one that has the most information is the one that's going to drive this negotiation. Okay? So I'm going to call the agent on the other side, and I'm going to ask the typical questions like,
What's still in the market?
is it still on the market? Is it available? A buyer that's interested? Have you had any previous offers?
When is he willing to move? When is he?
As much information I can get. This is in terms of the terms of the contract. I'm going to go through and ask some scenarios. Not that I'm giving them what we're going to do. I'm asking what's important to the other side. Okay. So if the seller had a preference of closing dates, how quickly do they want to move, or they need a little bit more time? In terms of the price, are they hard and fast on this price, or is there some room for negotiation? Okay. If we, I'm going to say it this way, if we were to give you full price, would the seller be willing to pay buyer closing costs? In other words, whether my buyer is going to ask for it or not, I'm just trying to get an idea of, one, does the other agent really understand what's important to their client? And I can honestly tell you, 99% of the time, they don't. Because I'll ask those questions. Well, I really don't know. I have to talk to them. I really don't know. Who you ask? So I'm just kind of laying the groundwork for what's important to sell. In other words, is the seller expecting truly full price offer on this property? And if so, why do you feel that's appropriate? Would you be willing to share your CMA with me so I can get an idea of what properties you use to come up with this sale price? Because again, I just want as much information as possible, so I'm going to ask a lot of questions. At times, I may even put the agent on the other side kind of in a position where I help them help me figure out what's more important. In other words, I may ask a question like before, if we were to write a full price offer on the house, would your seller be willing to pay $4,000 or $5,000 for closing costs? Okay. If they aren't willing to pay the closing costs, would they be willing to come down the price? If the seller can only get one of these things, close on this date or the price, which is more important to your seller? In other words, I'm just going to ask a lot of questions to figure out what is important to the other side. Doesn't mean I'm going to offer them that. Doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the way they want it. I just need to know that to go back to my buyer. Now, when I go back to my buyer, the conversation is going to be, here's what I found out. So when we write this offer, I need from your standpoint to know what's important to you. Is the price important? Is the closing cost important? Is the closing time important? Because that's going to help me help you negotiate this offer in the best way possible. So I've gotten information from the other side, and then I sit down and I get information from my buyer, and then I write the offer. Okay? Because I have a better chance of writing an offer with their help that's going to meet their needs and wants, and present it to the seller in a way that may come closer to meeting their needs and wants. Now, typically what I find is when I take that approach and take the time to do that up front, it's less of a back and forth of negotiation. We get closer to where we might agree on something at the beginning, so it's small increments to get us to where we need to be, rather than they're up here at 200,000 and we're coming in at 180, and we've got this huge gap to bridge. And we're that far apart, and it's little micro steps to get to the point where we want to get there. Okay? So gathering more and more information about these things, like the closing costs, closing date, what conveys with the property, fixtures and features, earnest money and option fee. A lot of times I'll ask the agent on the other side, what are you typically seeing on the offers that you're agreeing or recommending that your seller accept? How much due diligence fee? How much earnest money? Okay? Does the earnest money have to be right up front, or is it okay if we do additional earnest money? Okay? Now, what do y'all typically do with earnest money? Let's talk about that for a second. Do y'all typically take initial earnest money or additional earnest money?
Initial.
Initial? Okay, talk to me about why.
Just what to do. I'm just being like,
Well,
but
so,
I can understand why the additional.
because why is additional maybe a better way to approach it?
Because it gives everybody a little bit of chance to make sure that they're almost safe.
Well, that's part of it. That's part of it. It really depends on who you represent. Okay, from a standpoint of buyer, here's the way I typically approach it. I rarely ever do initial earnest money representing the buyer, and here's why. What is earnest money for? Good faith. Okay. But what is it for? When would it be used? At closing, if you close, but what if you don't close? In other words, it's really the only compensation for the seller if the buyer breaches the contract. When can the buyer breach the contract?
Last minute.
Well, last minute, but after what time frame? Due diligence. In other words, up until the end of the due diligence period, the buyer can't breach because they can walk away for any reason or no reason. Okay? So if they can't breach it until the end of the due diligence period, why put the earnest money in the trust account?
The addition.
Well, any earnest money in the trust account until they can possibly breach. And here's why I recommend that, is because you could have that one seller like I had. Because there is a dispute with North Carolina real estate right now as to if the contract says the buyer should get their earnest money back if they exercise their option for due diligence to walk away, they should immediately get their earnest money back. But it's a two-party agreement, right? It's a bilateral agreement, both buyer and seller have to. So now what form do you have to use to get that due diligence back?
Seller has to agree.
The seller has to agree. Termination of contract and release of earnest money, right? Right. So what if you had that one seller that I had, this is a true story, that was so upset with the negotiation process that the exact words out of his mouth were, "It'll be a cold day in hell before I'll sign this release of earnest money."
It has to go to small claims.
Then it has to go to small claims court. So just a tip, we're way off base here, but just a tip. That's why I always do additional earnest money. Typically, we do the additional earnest money one day following due diligence. So after the buyers agree to move forward, then we submit the additional earnest money into a trust account. Has to be in cashier's check or cash. Okay? And then you don't have to deal with that issue. If they terminate the contract, there's no earnest money to go back and have to get through.
I've been out of real estate for 5 years. I've just come back.
Okay.
I recently just sold. I have a house that I'm selling, and I sold it the other day.
Okay?
So I was really not completely clear about due diligence.
Okay.
And so I mean, I honored my word because that is proper. But the due diligence, I thought, and I didn't completely understand, which now I thoroughly understand. The due diligence, you know, because it was 100% loan, I said, well, okay. And I didn't know I was a dual agent. I was a sub-agent of the seller because I own the property and I listed the property and not a dual agent.
Okay.
So I had some confusion on agency because I've only a few times sold my own property.
Okay.
So I explained to the buyer, so I called the lender before I would write the contract. I said, well, I need to talk to your lender. I need to know that you're good to go and you have an approved loan. And realized that lender and I weren't necessarily speaking the same language. And so with the lender, really, I wanted to know if the person was not pre-qualified, but pre-approved,
Okay.
which in my brain means we have submitted all documentation, credit has been run, everything is good to go, contingent upon finding a property.
Okay.
So that's what I think it means.
I would agree with that.
So,
pre-approved.
Pre-approved means, we used to call it a piece of paper. Like if somebody gave us a pre-qualification letter, it was like, they just handed me a piece of paper, it means nothing.
Right.
Because basically, that person maybe can get a loan, but if they're kind of, their credit might have been run, but they don't really know.
Right.
So I was told, oh yes, fully pre-approved. Have since found out that person is not fully pre-approved. So because it was through the credit union and it was 100% loan, I said, well, in order to protect myself, I want a $500 due diligence fee. Now, the thing that I didn't understand, you guys might all totally understand, but just messes up like me, you know, we learn our lessons. I said, okay, your due diligence is up on the 30th. I said, and then that money becomes non-refundable. Well, once I went in and went through my contract with my broker explained to me, no, that due diligence money that person puts down, period, the fee does not, or the date does not apply. So I'm
confused as to the question.
Okay.
Well, let me explain the way due diligence fee works.
That
I
would be
think
good.
we'll see if that will answer the question. Okay. So, due diligence fee is not required, so you can't put zero in a contract, but it's simply a fee for you to take the property temporarily and kind of off the market. It'd still be a market. It's still technically an active listing because people can still see it. When it's in the due diligence, it is a contingent contract, not a pending contract. It doesn't go pending until the end of due diligence.
I did not know that.
So there's kind of a three-step approach. One is you're under contract that is contingent upon their inspection and approval to purchase the property. Then it goes pending, which means we've gone beyond due diligence, it's now moving to closing, and then there is closed. Okay, so active, contingent, pending, and closed. All right? The due diligence fee is paid to the seller and it's non-refundable. So if they decide to exercise their right to walk away from the property, the seller keeps that money. If it does go to closing, it is credited to them for the purchase price. Okay? So, now, based on that, what specifically is the question?
Okay, so what I did wrong, I put it in pending, not understanding.
Okay.
So I'm going to take
You
that.
can do that.
Well, I'm going to take that.
Yeah.
Because, you know, once I got more information and what I thought I was being in. So anyway, but I had explained to the person on the date of the due diligence it becomes non-refundable. So since I explained it to him properly, I'm obviously going to honor my word. So you keep a copy of the due diligence check and you give it to me on the due diligence date.
Okay. Yes, that is incorrect.
Right.
The check is written to the seller, it's acknowledged for receipt by the seller on the acknowledgement of receipt of monies, and it is non-refundable. It is you're paying for the right to investigate the property. Period.
Right, because it's the first contract I've written in 5 years, and so I just didn't get it right. So I was honoring my word.
Okay.
So.
And here's the thing, as the seller of the property, you certainly have the right to do that. Contractually, in the contract, it clearly states it is non-refundable.
But because I stated that, I wasn't going to go back on my word.
Okay.
But I didn't understand it properly, so that's why I thought, if you have other people, you might all have it down completely 100%.
Trust me, there's a lot of agents out there that still have a hard time with the due diligence.
Okay. So, yeah, I would definitely take it out of pending, so there's no place where it says under contract, you just don't put it pending.
It's contingent, and contingent means the closing is contingent on the buyer's investigation and approval of the property.
And when you go
And loan approval and all the other things.
and then in the MLS, is there a place to make it contingent versus pending?
Yes.
Okay, so,
At least there is in ours, and so there's some things as well.
okay, I see.
And then once the due diligence period ends, it goes from contingent to
Pending.
and that means it's moving forward.
Yeah.
And during the contingent period, it's still being marketed out there on the internet.
Okay.
Agents still have the ability to get it and show that, and if they want to run a backup offer. And if it's a really popular neighborhood and really popular property, chances are agents will do that. You know, checking with you on a regular basis to see how are things going. Does it look like it's going to close, or does it look like the buyer's going to walk, and maybe an opportunity for me to step in and like my contract. Okay. But let's talk a little bit more about due diligence and earnest money. What is typical practice for y'all in this area? Because again, this is a term that will be negotiated. We have firms in Raleigh, and they represent the buyer, they flat out refuse to pay any due diligence fee. We have others that want to, collect $500, $600, $700 in due diligence fee.
I think it's a little priceless.
Okay.
Normally, I think we try to get 1% of our spending due diligence
Combined. Yeah, so just split up some way.
Right, so it's $100,000 house, usually it's like 200 in due diligence, 800 in earnest, or whatever you agree upon, or 5 and 5.
Okay. So when might be appropriate, let's talk about this, when might it be appropriate to collect a smaller amount of due diligence? What might happen that you might recommend your seller accept a smaller amount or recommend the buyer pay smaller?
USDA,
USDA, explain that.
100% financing.
Okay.
They already are, they have the credit, they have everything, but they don't have a lot of money.
Okay.
So,
it might be financially, they just don't need to put more money into
Right.
it. How about a short due diligence period? Let's say they only want 2 weeks to do their due diligence.
To do the inspections and stuff.
Maybe they're paying all cash for the property and
yeah.
they want 10 days to do due diligence period. Would that be appropriate maybe to give a little bit on due diligence and not require it from the seller's point, or from the buyer's point, recommend not paying any due diligence fee at all? Okay. So again, time and money, negotiation, give and take. Okay. When might it be appropriate to ask for more due diligence fee? A long due diligence period. Okay.
I just had that going.
Okay.
So we had the buyers had to put up a lot of money for the due diligence.
Okay, so buyer had to put up a lot of money for the due diligence period. I'd say another one is if the due diligence and the closing dates are very, very close together. In other words, let's say it's only a 30-day due diligence period, but they're closing in 35 days. So you're off the market a long time, and there's only a very short window that buyer can technically breach that contract. Representing a seller, I might say if you want that time frame, we're going to increase the due diligence fee. Still only going to be the 1%, it's just the majority of it is going to be due diligence fee as opposed to earnest money. Okay? So again, these are points that you can negotiate that maybe the listing agent is going to have a different opinion than the buyer's agent, and the clients are going to have a different opinion. The idea is there's a lot of ways that can be structured. You just have to find out what the logic is behind it. And if the logic makes sense, then the agent's job is to work the mechanics of the contract, keep the emotion out of it, and just advise your client as to which way we might be able to get this contract worked through. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. Repairs. Are those challenging?
Yes.
Yeah. So what kind of things can you do before, let's say way even before
Get the sellers get their own inspection.
sellers get their inspection in advance of putting their house on the property? Now, why would that be an advantage to you down the road?
For negotiations, because if you come up and that thing, you have 10 floor joists that need to be replaced, and this is not our negotiations, then so it'll be that big.
Right.
Because I didn't do that.
Right. So getting it up front, here's the thing.
But then now sellers are like, look, that's the buyer's job. I said, well, in most cases, that's how it normally is done. However, I want to protect you. And I just went through this where I've got power of attorney over the house, and so it's like a mess. And I said, look, this has been a single man that's lived here for a really long time, and he's older. We need an inspection.
Good point. Good point.
I mean, they just don't hear and see the things.
And also, like if you're negotiating and they know up front, okay, I have to pay X amount of dollars to repair this, and this is probably what I'm looking at. That's going to maybe they're not going to be willing to pay so much closing costs because they know there's going to be repairs. Right? It could be. Right. It gives them information in order to make an intelligent decision.
That's
on how to
the key.
market the property.
That's really the key. I understand if the buyers see items that need to be repaired, how much money is going through their head that's going to be needed for those repairs?
Big dollars.
Right. Versus the seller, when they see those repairs, how much money are they looking to spend? The least amount. So there's a gap you've got to bridge. Buyer is always going to overestimate the cost of repair, usually 2 to 3 times. Seller is always going to underestimate the cost of repair, sometimes 2 to 3 times. So the point of having the seller do an inspection up front is, this is just my guidance to you, Mr. and Mrs. Sellers. But what I find is, when we wait to negotiate repairs after they're discovered, after we're in a contract, the buyer is probably going to want 2 to 3 times more than the actual cost of that repair. So even though the inspection report that we're looking at paying, $400 to $500, may seem that it should be the buyer's cost, that $400 to $500 expense may save you thousands of dollars when it comes to negotiating this contract. So wouldn't it be better to do that on the front end and know and take care of, so that there's fewer items when it comes to negotiating the contract later on? That's where we'll save you money. Is yes, it is an investment in your property, but you know, here's the thing: 8 out of 10 contracts that we don't do this on, and the buyer has their home inspector come in, we get this laundry list of items that you are totally unaware of because you didn't crawl under your house yesterday. It's been a year since you've been underneath your house, and you didn't notice the water under there, or you didn't notice the mildew on the beach, you didn't notice all the insulation hanging down. So again, it depends on the seller. If they're really active in maintaining their house and they're under there all the time and they're in the attic all the time and they really know their house, it's not an issue. That's not the average seller out there. Okay? So by doing that up front, that can eliminate some of the challenges down the road. Again, our job as agents is to look ahead at potential problems. Having those discussions up front with our seller, with our buyer, about here's what to expect when the inspection report comes in. Here's what to expect when the buyer gets an inspection report. We have to negotiate. Again, communication is the key to those one-way negotiations down the road. Having our client mentally in the game as to what's going to happen, whether that's the buyer or whether that's the seller, makes coming together during the negotiation that much easier. Okay? All right. But basically, as Tony DeSello says, it all comes down to price, time, and what's included and what's not included. Would you agree? Okay. So again, when you're meeting with your seller at the listing appointment and they've decided to list with you, if not at that appointment, at another appointment, or by a series of emails letting them know here's what's going to happen next, that's where you want to start engaging them in that conversation about here's what's going to happen when we get an offer. Okay. Let's talk about negotiating repairs. Let's talk about what's important to you in terms of timing, in terms of price, in terms of are you willing to pay some of the closing costs. If it is likely that the buyer is going to do that in your price point, have that conversation up front so it's not a surprise when the contract comes in. Same with the buyer. When you meet with them at that initial buyer needs analysis appointment and they decide to work with you, talk with them or send a series of emails. Now that we're in a contract, here's what to expect. You know, when we get to home inspection, there's going to be a list of things. It's going to be 3 categories. 1 is going to be broke, needs to be repaired. 2, just bad maintenance on it. Or 3, potentially down the road, maybe something you want to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Now, of all of those 3 items, absolutely the repair items, we should ask for in most cases. Not all. In most. It'll depend on how much that repair is and whether you walk away from this contract for a $200 repair.
I had one this afternoon, and I let him know that everything on that is not going to be repaired unless it's necessary. It's just a peace of mind for him to let him know what's going to happen in the future, what he may have to repair in the future. Because sometimes they go in and they want the owner to renovate the house again, and let them know it's not that.
Yeah, and I actually had a client like that. They, again, high D, they were a little bit arrogant. You know, I really ramp up when that happens sometimes. And basically I said, you know, oh, I am so sorry. I really wish you had told me you wanted a brand new house when you first started looking. Because that's all it showed me. Now that's my sense of humor. That's my sense of humor as a high D, okay? And I feel confident that I can pull a statement like that off. You know, because they will look at me and go, yeah, I get it. Now, some personalities will have a hard time saying something very to the point like that, even jokingly. But I think sometimes you have to. I mean, literally, if I know you want to buy a new house, that's all we're going to look at. Okay? The reality is we're not buying a new house. There's going to be some maintenance that hasn't been done. There's going to be some things that are going to be broken, and those are the ones we'll focus on. The question I have is, what's your tolerance of dollars before you walk away? In other words, what's an amount of repairs that you're willing to negotiate, and then let me work on that for you before you're saying, if repairs come in more than $2,000, I don't care what about the rest of the house. I'm walking with it. I want to know that up front. Because the likelihood that, the average home is going to have $500 to $1,000 or $1,500 in repairs is likely. I mean, when you consider the number of homes that are more than 20 years old in our market, 80% of the homes in the U.S. are more than 20 years old. They're all going to have some deferred maintenance of some type. Okay. All right. So, tailing your buyer's request for inclusion of seller's personal items. Here's probably the best story I have about what the seller considered a personal item, the buyer considered a fixture. Okay, I wasn't the agent in this transaction. I have to be the broker charge at that time. One of our agents met with the seller. The seller specifically said the chandelier in the foyer is going with us. We don't want it included as one of the fixtures. Of course, our agent recommended, well, if it's that important to you, we really recommend that you take it down. But if not, we'll make a note on that that's not too bad. Okay? And then the agent forgot to put that in all the listing service that the chandelier didn't convey. Okay? Buyer walks to the house, looks the house, and writes an offer line. The offer gets accepted. They go to do the final walkthrough, and the chandelier's not there. And this was apparently one of the wow factors when they walked in the house. Okay? So, long story short, the more the seller held out on not replacing that chandelier, what was going through the buyer's mind? What else? No, not what else. It must be a really valuable chandelier for them not to want to give it up. Okay? So we had a conversation with the seller. And the seller was, well, we were in this little dinky store in Denver, Colorado, and we were on vacation out there, and my wife just fell in love with it. And, it's really emotionally, she's attached to it. She's not willing to give it up. It's kind of a rare piece. And, they were thinking, all right, well, if we have to leave it, we want $2,000 for it. Literally, that's what they said. It's that valuable. We want $2,000 for it. And of course, the buyer is not willing to pay $2,000 for the chandelier. Long story short, our agent found that exact chandelier in a lamp shop in Charlotte, North Carolina. And you know what it was paid? We paid for it. $175. $175. The exact chandelier. Wow. Okay. Now, you see how that kind of went sideways? You see how that kind of went sideways? Suspicion starts getting, emotional suspicion starts getting involved when the seller wants to hold out, or they put a price out there that this is what the chandelier is worth. So now they feel like they're being slighted because they put an offer on the house that included that chandelier, and now the house is worth $2,000 less than what we originally were supposed to get. So that's where money comes into this. What's it worth for you to walk away from this property? Okay. Now, what could have been done to avoid all that?
Change it out.
Change it out.
Right. I put a tag on it.
Put a tag on it that says this chandelier does not convey. Okay. Follow your seller's guidelines. And then if that wasn't done, and it wasn't conveyed that chandelier was supposed to stay, from the seller's standpoint, having that conversation with the seller, so at what price are you willing to walk away from this? In other words, you're willing to outbid the buyer that's interested in buying your house. Because if that chandelier is worth that much to you, and you're willing to outbid them for this house, and you get to stay here for another 6 months, make 6 months more mortgage payments on it, and not be able to move to Chicago like you want to move, what's that worth to you? I mean, we have to kind of bring them back to reality. But that's my best story of a personal item that should have been handled differently up front. Now, in the meantime, here's a great script. I'd be more than happy to write that into the contract for you. I feel when you start involving people's personal property, it becomes more emotional. Did you say that's a true statement? Yeah, and here's the thing. Our job, and you will hear me say this over and over and over again, our job is to work the mechanics of the transaction, keep the emotion out. Emotion is what causes this wedge in between agent and agent's client and our client. So keep that out as much as possible. The other item you're going to find is clarifying the inspection report for your buyer, because they just assume everything on that inspection report is a major item.
Yes.
Okay. Now, how many of you have seen 4 or 5 inspection reports over the last 6 months? How many of them include the resistance check between ground and the electrical system, and it's always over 25 ohms? Y'all see that on y'all's inspection reports out here a lot? No?
I'm just
You have no idea what we're talking about. Okay. Electrical code requires that when they do a ground ohm measurement, that ground is 25 ohms or less. In probably over 500 homes I've sold, I've never seen it below 25 ohms. It always comes up on the inspection report. Okay? And the fact that it's an electrical issue in the buyer's mind makes it a safety issue. Okay, now, what they don't know is that in North Carolina, what the code actually says is, the requirement is that if the measurement comes in above 25 ohms, you're supposed to drive another ground rod into the ground and then connect it with 6-gauge copper wire to the other ground rod, and that hopefully will lower the measurement. Now, what they don't know is that if that doesn't work, they've done everything they're supposed to do. It doesn't matter whether it comes in under 25 ohms or not, they're done. That's what the electrical code says. So a lot of times we'll get a reading of 110 ohms to ground, and they want the seller to put it in a ground rod, which is about $250, $275. And I've never actually seen it reduce it down below probably 50 ohms at that point. And guess what? It's still over the reading, but there's nothing else that's required to be done with it. Okay? So I preface with the buyers, I can almost guarantee this is one of the things that's going to come up on the inspection report. Unless it's just wildly crazy, 200, 300 ohms above in resistance, the likelihood that you're going to drive around rod and it's going to mean anything to this is probably a good point. Let's stick that one over on the side if it comes up on the inspection report, and if nothing else major comes up, maybe we'll address that. But if we've got 3 other items that are more important that they really take care of, let's just kind of set that one off to the side and don't worry about that. Because it's probably not going to do anything, not going to change anything much anyway. Okay? So that's one of those things that I always know comes up. Disconnect switch. How many of you on the inspection report disconnect switch on your dishwasher? On-off switch is required by code on your dishwasher. Always comes up on our inspection reports. Okay? Code says, for safety purposes, with the technician working on that, there is supposed to be a disconnect switch on the dishwasher that they can turn the power off without having to go out to the power panel. And it comes up on the inspection report all the time. So they want them to install, again, another electrical job. They say it's a safety issue. But here's the comment that the actual technician on the dishwasher said. Just unplug it. I mean, I can get the ag. I unplug the dishwasher. That's a disconnect. It's not a switch, but it's a disconnect. So why do you need to do that? Those kind of things that come up on the inspection report, you need to be attuned, if you're representing the buyer or the seller, what is typical that comes up that should not be considered a major issue. And have that discussion with the buyer or the seller way before the contract ever comes in, way before the negotiation starts, so that they don't get emotionally attached to that decision that's made. Okay, again, more information, preparing the field for battle up front goes a long way to getting through these items like this. So, clarifying the inspection report. I understand that you're a little concerned about the inspection report. I recommend that we negotiate for a dollar amount so we can be in control of who addresses these issues. Do you think that's a concern for buyers and sellers? Okay. If we represent the buyer, what is it we believe the seller wants to do?
The least amount.
Least amount for the least amount of money.
Correct.
They'll pay for cheap labor to do it and not do it correctly. So if the way the repair is going to be done is important to you, Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, I recommend we negotiate some dollars in return. And then you control it and you have your contractor come out and have them do it the way that you want it done. Does that make sense? Okay? Now again, Is it going to be difficult to do that in terms of how much we negotiate? Yeah, if we just go by guess. If the buyer just starts guessing how much it's going to cost, well, I might be able to do that for $5,000 for repair items for a $1,000 bill. Okay? So the way to handle that is, great. If we want to control it, let's go get a couple of estimates. You choose which vendor you want to use, and we use that estimated amount to go negotiate for the amount of dollars that we're going to get. Does that make sense? Okay? Keep the emotion out, work the process. We have some assumed repairs. Let's get some estimates. The technician's going to know exactly what it's going to cost or not cost. Let's use that dollar amount. We've got that to prove to the seller. This is what it's going to take to repair this item. And let's go from there. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other challenges that you've had or concerns you will have when it comes to negotiating repairs? No? Not yet? What's been your worst nightmare in terms of negotiating repairs?
Floor joists.
Floor joists?
They came up
Okay.
bad, and the seller's like, my floor joist has never been that. And I'm like, well, they are now. I'm like, oh, you were in the house 6 months ago, a lot can happen in 6 months.
Right.
They're bad, they need to be replaced. Well,
Now, was it the home inspector that brought that up? Did they get a structural inspection?
Yes.
Structural inspection up? So the inspectors did the inspection, and that proved the point that they were bad.
then we had great people out there for the soil.
Okay. So how did you work through that? Or did you?
I did.
Okay.
And I just told them, I says, you either fix the problem now, let your house, and this is when the market was going completely fast.
Market was heading down south fast.
Yeah, bad. I said, you either repair it or you're going to stay here in Greenwood, not make a move here.
Right.
What's your thing?
Right. Well, and that again, where you use emotion to your advantage is which generally speaking is a bigger motivator. The ability to get something or the fear of not getting it. Fear of not getting something is much more of an emotional driver. And that's the only time that I recommend that you use emotion when it comes to negotiation. Because sometimes you have to put that fear in them to get them off the fence to make a decision one way or the other. Now, by the way, the non-emotional part of that is, I honestly, it's not my decision as to whether you move to carry or not. Or you stay in the house. It's your decision. I'm just giving you the information you need to make that decision based on what's going to be best for you. I'm okay with either one of those. Stay in this house, move to carry, either one's fine with me.
Lose the other house, you already put an offer on and all that.
Boy, you're really going default. That's perfect. That's perfect.
My best period is I had a seller where we negotiated for a fee.
Okay.
And so then, and I really don't like to be on both sides of the transaction. If I can avoid it, I just think it's silly here not to. But I was on both sides. And so we negotiated a fee. And then for whatever reason, the buyer sued her in small claims court for, she went out to spend the money, did not repair anything she was supposed to repair, and then she wanted to repair it. Of course, we were only there 30 seconds. And they said, well, no, you can't have both. And then, so she sued the buyer first, then she sued me. So then I had to go in and say, well, we gave her the money. And so it got kicked out within 30 seconds both times, but that was my best story.
Wow.
Where she just went, she goes, well, you know, I had other things that I really needed to get done. And I said, well, that's inconsequential. You know,
You did with the money what you did?
we gave you the money, what you did with it was your choice. If you chose not to repair it, you don't get it both ways.
Right.
But she really thought that for some reason she could get it both ways. So that
Now,
was my
are there
first
times where, in this case, it's okay for the buyer to let the seller take care of certain items?
Yeah.
It could be. I mean, you know, again, that comes to timing, comes to cost, comes to control over or the ability to control the quality of the work. So it could be, we get the estimates, we choose who the vendor is for the buyer's sake, but the seller is going to have to work work done before closing, but they're using our vendor, and they're paying the cost of what that vendor's charging to do it. So yeah, it's okay for the seller to do it as long as it in terms of what the buyer's needs are, what the seller agrees to, they both come to terms on. That's fine. But if it's what I find is the little things like repairing dry rot, you know, for instance, you have dry rot on this casing here, and typically what the sellers do is the vendor will cut it off here and replace from there down rather than replacing the whole piece. So you have good wood down the bottom, but aesthetically it doesn't look as nice as you want it to look. Those little kind of things, you're probably better off negotiating money and having the buyer control the quality of that as opposed to the seller if you represent the buyer. Okay. All right. When your buyer wants the seller to make repairs, I understand this is important to you. In my experience, repairing this item cost about $700. While that's not inconsequential, is it worth losing this house? Valid question? Yeah. All things being equal, if the seller had a competitive offer for exactly $700 more and gave you the chance to match that offer in order to keep the house, wouldn't you want to match that offer? Is that sinking in?
Yeah.
Now, I can see where this script or this conversation could, in the back of your mind, be sounding like, well, we're just trying to get them to buy the house because we want them to buy the house and we want to collect a commission check. Could you see it that way? In other words, we're going to say anything we could say to get them to move forward. That's not what this script is about. I mean, honestly, sometimes you have to have these straightforward, to-the-point conversations with your buyer and with yourself, and put it to them in a perspective that maybe it makes a little more sense. Because they will tend to want to make decisions emotionally, but that's all about justifying their decision. Logically, they have to make the right choice first, and then emotionally buy into it.
I think people naturally want to win, too, even if they're not. And so when they hear that, sometimes it's a little bit of, okay, are you really going to lose? Because in the long run, you're going to lose.
Right.
You think you're trying to win with the $700, but really what's going to happen is you're going to lose. And that can kind of tug at an emotion for them, too.
I agree. So you have to get them to define what's win and what's lose.
Right.
And again, that goes back to the early on conversations. What are you going to consider a win and what are you going to consider a loss? You know, if winning is getting in a house with your family that you know you're going to be happy with for the next 5 to 6 years that you live there, is that the most important thing? Well, great. Is that worth $700 to you to have to walk away from that? You're just trying to get them to make a logical decision first and then emotionally buy into it. Okay? Recommend that your seller counter a low offer. Anybody dealt with this one? I see all kinds of emotion on that face.
I'm dealing with one like that now.
Okay. So how do you deal with that?
Wait, right here.
I'm like going, it's an offer. Let's see how far.
That's all it is. It's an offer. It's an offer. It's not a, you know, you're going to see this as a slap in the face. It's not a slap in the face. We don't know what's going on inside their head.
Right.
So let's not assume that they're just trying to steal our house from us, which is how you go through solar state. I'm not going to give the damn thing away. I'm not going to let them steal this house from me. I mean, and as soon as they say that, say, now look, I understand that, but that's an emotional response. Let's set the emotion aside and just view it for what it is. It's an offer. We're not going to add adjectives to it. We're not going to say it's a good offer, a bad offer. You know, it's an offer. It's a starting point.
I'm going to reject it right now.
Okay. And
Fine. Like, at least come back. Well, we're going to make the full price.
and that's what you have to deal with. Again, the emotional response. The emotional response of that. So when they want to go in emotional direction, again, you can go back and take them down. Okay, well, let's take a step back for a second here. Why is it we're selling this house? Why is that important to you? What is that going to do for you and your family? What is it you're hoping to accomplish with the sale of this house? If we can get that offer closer in line with what you want, and it helps you get what you originally told me was important to you, isn't that the important thing? All right, so let's keep the emotion off the table for right now, and let's just treat it for what it is. It's an offer. We don't know whether we'll go anywhere. We don't know if we'll be able to negotiate to a successful closing, but let's just start with set the emotion aside. Yes, you can reject it. I can tell by the tone of your voice you're not going to accept it. So let's kind of take the middle of the road and let's at least counter back at what might be some agreeable terms to you. We'll start there. And we'll just see where this goes. And if it doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere, next. We'll move on to the next offer. That's not. Okay? Let's just keep the emotion in check. It's an offer. Now, by the way, and I would say it to them this way, what if this is the only offer we get? See, I like doing kind of like, y'all watch the show Columbo? Walking out the door and just, oh, by the way, one more thing. What if this is the only offer we get? What's plan B? So what do I mean by that?
What are we going to do? Are we going to stay here?
Yeah, we're going to take them. We're going to take them back to. If they're going to play the emotion game, we're going to take them back to. All right. So what's plan B? Let's say this is the only offer we get. We can't negotiate that. So what's plan B to helping you accomplish what you want to accomplish, which is you want to move to Cary. You need this property off your plate so you're not making this mortgage payment anymore. Are you willing to rent it? I mean, I would just toss out some things that might be an option and say, do any of those appeal to you? And if they don't, then it brings us back to, let's go as far as we can possibly go with this offer and see where it goes. Now, does that strategy work with the buyers as well? Yeah. If this is the only house that meets your needs, this is the only one you're going to be happy with, what's plan B? What do we do next? We continue looking. You give up, you stay in the apartment you're in. You decide not to take the job, you're going to move here. And I would put out questions like that to them to get them back to reality. Because that's where you got to get it back to, is reality. Okay? All right. Prepare your seller to negotiate a high-cost repair. We've talked a little bit about this. But here's the script they use. We've received a repair request. The buyers have a structural engineer take a look at the house, and the engineer is recommending that 8 piers be put underneath the home. What I know from my experience is that piers cost approximately $300 a piece. I can recommend you to some people who can get the other bids within the next several days. Then we can get back to the buyer with their option period, within their option period, to let them know whether you think this is something you can take care of. And then we can get this home sold. So again, we're just kind of laying a direction. We're not saying we have to do this. We're saying let's take a step back. Let's think about this a little bit. Here's some possibilities. We're not asking you to make a decision to make that repair today. Let's go investigate. Let's find out exactly what the cost is going to be so we gather all the information, like you said. Gather all the information so you can make the best decision for you and your family. How's that sound? In other words, take 10 slow breaths, breathe, don't get emotional, let's think about this, and then when we have all the facts, then we'll move forward. That's really where you have to take a lot of the time, is get them to take a breath, because the initial instinct is to blow up. Okay? All right, counsel your seller when the buyer requests personal items. Again, flip side of the coin. Honestly, how much is that chandelier really worth? Truly, how much is it really worth? I understand there's dollar values to emotion. Okay.
And inevitably, if you put something doesn't commit,
They want it.
they want it
Exactly.
every time. So now I just have to replace it. Pack it up, you're moving anyway, just, you're ready.
And the way this approach is, we can put something else up there. just for the purpose of showing the house, put something else up there. Then you don't have to deal with it down the road. You've already got a package ready to go. It's one less thing you have to pack and put in the truck.
I told this to another agent Thursday. Broke open. And I thought the chandeliers were hideous. I mean, I like went, and they were like, oh, these chandeliers came from Italy, it's 24 karat gold, all this. I was like, that's it. Just take them down, put them in storage, and tell them that they don't need to be up there. I said, and since the guys come to take the pictures, please don't let them take those pictures of it, because there's going to be that other crazy person.
You can say that other crazy person is going to think they're worth a whole lot more.
I mean, it was like a chandelier this big, but it needed to be this big in the area, in my opinion.
In today's market, for those of you who are dealing with buyers, are they more likely to pay more for something they really want, or want something at the price you're offering, in other words, they want more for the price they're paying? They'll pay more for what they want, or they want more for what they're paying. Which one are they more? They always want more for what they're paying. So for them, that conversation about giving something up to the buyer, it's not going to happen. You've got to get that off the plate early on. All right, let's talk about the 3 Ps. This goes back to what I was saying early on. Prepare, present, and then position. The prepare is about gathering all that information. That's why I said, before I even write an offer for my buyer, I have a conversation with the listing agent on the other side. When I do get an offer from a buyer, before I present it to my seller, I have a conversation with the buyer's agent. I want to gather as much information as possible. Now, I realize in today's days of technology, because I can think back to when I got my license in 1988, before we even had fax machines, you actually drove to the seller's house with your buyer in the car and walked into the living room and you presented the offer for them. And they'd say, oh, we need to think about this. I go, great, I'll be sitting in my car, just, flash the light outside the house or open the door, read me in when you're ready for me to come back in. That's the way it was done. Seriously, that's the way it was done. Many a time I walk back out of the car, great news, they've accepted your offer if you'll do this. Well, we can agree to that. Great. We walk back in, they sign the paperwork, we bring it back out, it's done. Yeah. Now, when the fax machines came along, there's no reason to even have a conversation with the agent on the other side. They know all about my offer. They're going to be able to present it for me in the best light. Really? No. No, that doesn't happen. Okay? That's why it's important to have that conversation, is to find out what's important. So when I'm representing a seller, a buyer comes in from an offer, I call the agent, I go, I just want to cover the highlights of the offer. You're offering this amount. Out of curiosity, where did this number come from? Have you actually run numbers on the property? Or if I can justify a higher price, are you willing for me to send over my CMA so you can review it with your buyer? Okay. I see that your buyer is offering $5,000, requesting $5,000 and buyer pay closing costs. Out of curiosity, if the buyer can only have the house at the price they're asking for, or the seller pay closing costs on the buyer's behalf, if they can only have one of those, which one would your buyer want? In other words, is it more important that they get the closing costs, or is it more important that they get it at the price that they want? If they can only have, I'm not saying this seller to say that. I'm just asking up front so I can present your offer in the best light. So which one of those is more important? Well, they're both important. So they're strict, and I would say it this way. If their response was that, they want both, they need both. I go, so let me see if I understand this correctly. Your buyer is making an offer at the highest they can possibly qualify, which is why you're asking for the lowest possible price. And they're having a difficult time bringing money to the table, so they want the seller to pay the majority of their closing costs. Is that what I'm hearing? Now, what do you think the agent's response is on the other side? Well, and I might say that. I go, that's really where you're coming from, that you want them to sell it to you at the lower end of the range that this house should sell for, and you're asking them to pay a lot of your costs. I'm not sure my seller is going to receive that very well. So I just want to make sure before I present to them, I understand truly where your buyer is coming from. Okay? Because I'm going to put a little pain on their side too. Okay? Because I may say, you know, the house has only been on the market one day. It's a pretty hot market. I mean, our last 4 listings, we've had multiple offers. So is this really the offer your buyer wants to present to my seller in today's market? If I'm representing the seller, I have to talk like I'm representing the seller. Okay? If I'm representing the buyer, I have to sound like I'm representing the buyer. Kind of set the tone for when we go here. I'm trying to help you get your offer accepted. I need to understand where you're coming from. Okay? So then when I go meet with my seller, what am I saying with my seller? Here's what I found out. Let me explain their offer to you. Okay? Of the 2 things, closing costs were more important, which means we may have some room to negotiate on the price. Okay? So if you're amenable to that, here's what I'd recommend in terms of reject, accept, or counter. If you're not happy with the exact terms, let's at least make a counter offer back. And where we have the room to maybe get an accepted offer is increasing the price a little bit to offset the amount of closing costs that are coming in. Does that make sense? Great, then let's take that approach and we'll make that counter offer back to them. But I never make that recommendation or couldn't make that recommendation unless I gather that information up front. Does that make sense? So I'm going to ping on you over and over, hammer that in. Don't write an offer before you talk to the listing agent. Don't present an offer to your seller until you talk to the buyer's agent. Get that information up front before you present. All right? That's all about the preparation stage. Then you present it, just like we talked about. Now that I've got all the facts, or at least what I think are all the facts, because you all know that term, buyers, liars, sellers are worse. Okay? Is you present the information that you have. Now, if something doesn't seem right during the preparation, in other words, we present to that seller, here's what they said, okay? There may be some points of clarification that come back. Well, what about this? Do you think they might be thinking this? Go back to the other side again. Talk to them before you accept or reject the counter. Say, hey, a couple of items came up when I was discussing with the seller. Here's what we'd like to know. Get some more information. Great, I appreciate that. Let me take that back to the seller and present some more. And hopefully we'll get you an answer here in the next couple of hours. Okay? Constantly going back. Put yourself in a position where, Alan, you and I, we both want this deal to come together if possible, right? Okay. So the more you can help me understand where your buyer's coming from, the more I can present my seller in a way that maybe we can come to terms much quicker than what we're used to. Does that make sense? Great. If I'm on the buyer side, I'm going to say the same thing. Alan, you and I, we both want what your seller wants, okay? We want to come to terms so they can sell it. We can sell it. So let me take that information back to my buyer and see where we can go. Not confrontational, right? Now, will there be times where you have to put the other agent on the other side of the place? Yeah. Now, here's what most won't tell you about negotiations. Sometimes it's okay to walk away or appear to walk away to make your point. We've got a couple of agents in our marketplace. They just think they are God's gift to a real estate agent, and what they want is what they ought to get because nobody ever stands up to them. Okay? And sometimes you just have to put your hand out, and they're always asking for more, asking for more, asking for more. When they ask for something, I'm fine with it. I'm happy to take that to my client and see what they say. But when every other hour they're calling me, oh, by the way, oh, by the way, oh, by the way, eventually I just stand up and say, I've got my client's permission to tell you to go pound sand. We're not going any further with this. We're done. If that's your tack, if you really don't want to buy this house, we're fine with that. We wish you all the best. Just pass that on your plan. And all of a sudden, it gets real quiet on the other end of the phone. And they go, well, I really didn't mean that. I go, all right, well, let's back up a little bit. When you keep coming at me that way and just demanding, this is not us working together for a win-win. So you need to get back to the mechanics of the contract, ask in a nice way what you're asking for. Stop coming back time and time and time again. If you need to take 3 or 4 days to really figure out what your buyer wants, go figure it all out. And then come to me with what everything is so that we're dealing with these issues all at the same time. And then maybe we can get this thing working for you. Can you do that for me? Okay? So sometimes you have to take that tact. Sometimes you're working with an inexperienced agent on the other side. There's nothing wrong with helping an agent on the other side that needs some help. Not to the contrary of your client. In other words, you're not helping them make a presentation to your client in that respect. You still represent your client. But, for instance, we had a listing. It was a rehab house that the investor kind of ran out of money. Only had it about maybe 75, 80% complete. Didn't have any of the kitchen cabinets up or anything like that. So it was probably going to have to be a cash offer most likely, but I knew there were some other programs that would work. Okay? The agent coming and presenting the offer for their client, young couple, first-time home buyers, it was a cute little house. They really wanted it. They couldn't figure out a way to buy it because they thought they had to come with all cash. And I said, well, have you heard of the 203K loan? What's that? You know what the 203K loan is? Okay. It's basically a home improvement loan. FHA loan, home improvement. They do an appraisal in current condition, an appraisal if certain improvements were done. And as long as with those improvements we qualify for that amount, they loan the money to do the repairs. So they were able to, I was able to put them in touch with a lender who had done 203K loans, and I said, just consider that approach. If your buyer really wants to buy and they can't afford to do, and they can't afford to pay cash for it, that may be an opportunity for your client to go consider. So I helped them go get the loan that they needed to come buy our house.
Win-win.
Win-win. Yeah. I didn't care that they didn't understand what the 203K loan. I was happy to explain it to them. Help their client, help my client. I look at that as doing what's best for my client. He really wanted to sell the house. We really had to sell the house. And we were able to work through that. But so, you know, the agent on the other side, sometimes they're going to be confrontational. Take a deep breath. Try to work through it. If they continually take that attitude, what I'm going to tell you is part of negotiation is knowing when to pull out the big guns. Okay? And I have told more than one agent in my time to go pound sand with my client's permission. With my client's permission. All right. In preparing that, let me kind of take a step back here for a second. The preparation. Having the end in mind, and we've heard this in KW jargon for years and years, start with the end in mind. It's part of the White Horse two T's. Start with the end in mind. Knowing what's important for your client, knowing what's important for the person making the offer on the other side, helps you chart a course of a win-win negotiation, which is why you gather all that information. Knowing your client ahead of time in terms of do a gut check. How risk averse are they? How willing to concede are they? How much do they really want this house? One of the questions I always ask the buyer before writing off, especially if we're in a long situation. If you're outbid on this house and you don't win it, how upset are you going to be on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being you can care less, move on, and 10 being you're breaking out the bottle of wine and the box of chocolates because you're done. Doesn't matter what number they give me, whether it's a 7 or 8. I'm going to ask them to explain that to me. What does that mean? Okay, what would it take to get you beyond that number to a point where you're going to be happy with what happens? Okay, because I've got to know that in terms of negotiating on their behalf, how strong I need to be going in, how direct I need to be going in, how really kind of fluid or able to give and take they want me to be going in. In other words, a soft approach, a hard approach. What do you want me to do on your behalf? Okay. Then when I come back and we're actually writing the offer, we're looking at an offer, I can take them back to that conversation about, here's how you initially told me you wanted me to negotiate on your behalf. Are we still thinking that now? Mr. Seller, do you really want me to take a heavy-handed approach here? This may be the only offer we get. Is this what you want me to do? If you do, that's fine. Okay, we'll take that approach. If you go, no, I really need to get the carry, maybe we can be a little more flexible here when it comes to negotiation. Great, that's what I need to know. Okay. All right, that goes to setting the clear expectations as well, and being informed. An informed mind is an empowered mind, a confident mind. That's why you ask those open-ended questions. really get into the heads of the other side and your clients, understand where they're coming from, understand what's important to them, what's not important to them, so that you can take that next step, which is actually making the negotiations work for you. Okay? Always obey the law, know your documents inside and out. How many of y'all really feel confident with your contract agreements? Okay? I started doing something in Chapel Hill office because I'm the broker in charge in Chapel Hill too, and I'm doing a big question of the week. We do it every Thursday, and then we talk about it at the next week's team meeting. Now, we do this through the heavy internet, so several agents will respond and tell me what they think about these, things during the week, and we discuss it for about 10 minutes at team meeting, and then I give the answer to the question at team meeting, and then we send that out to everybody on the Thursday when it's out. Next question. And here's what I realize. Most agents are pretty knowledgeable of the offer and purchase and listing agreement, but when it comes to the additional documents that you can attach, not so much. Contingent sale addendum, not so much. So what I recommend is get a little more familiar with the nuances there. We may want to start something over here in terms of the big question of the week, just to kind of see where they are.
That's great.
It's really simple to do.
Yeah, I think you use the acknowledgement of money received.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did.
I mean, here's one that went out. Here's one that went out recently. Well, here are two that went out recently. Lead-based paint disclosure is required when? Built prior to 1978. Now, here's the question. What does HUD require, or what is HUD or EPA's determination of built prior to 1978? But how do they determine you're built? If a permit was let, if a permit was given to build a house prior to January 1st, 1978, even if construction wasn't started until 2000, it's considered built prior to 1978 as far as the EPA. Now, if no permit was let, it is when construction started, not when the house CO was given, not when people moved in, not when it closed, it's when it was started, okay? So, if it was started prior to January 1st, 1978, and wasn't completed until June of 1979, a lead-based paint is required. Now, that's a nuance. Most people don't know that, okay? That's how well you should know the contract. All right? All right, preparing to negotiate. Here's the scenario. You represent a buyer. Your client is a young woman who's renting her property. Like any first-time home buyer, she is looking to you to guide her through the process. The asking price for the home she really loves is $175,000. The house appears to have evidence of roof leaks, is listed as is, and is currently priced. Your client would like to keep her payments as low as possible since she still has a number of student loans to pay off. She wants to write an offer for $155,000. There's been quite a bit of activity on the listing, right? So, what kind of questions are you going to ask your client?
Are you pre-approved?
Are you pre-approved? Okay. Let's assume she's pre-approved.
When's your lease up?
When's your lease up?
Is she willing to do the repairs herself?
Okay. Can she afford to do the repairs herself? Okay.
We can put that into the contract where roof be repaired, but even though it says as is, there is that possibility that you can't negotiate that.
Okay.
How much do you want the house? Because it says there that the house is priced properly, so coming in $20,000 a year would seem very motivated.
Okay.
Do you have access to regular cash or who's to make the repairs yourself
Okay.
from mom or dad?
Okay. I mean, one of the ones I'll always ask in a certain scenario like this is kind of what you're alluding to, how much you want the house. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1, you don't care whether you buy this house or not. Okay? And 10 being, this is the house that if you don't get it, you're going to be totally distraught and wake up tomorrow morning chocolates from that time. Where are we at? Now again, whenever you do that scale 1 to 10, it doesn't matter what number they give you. That's a starting point for continuing the discussion. Let's just say she says it's a 6. Well, what does a 6 mean to you? I'd really like to have the house, but I can't get it on the terms that I want. I'm okay to walk away from it. Okay, well, let's talk about that. Typically in our market, I go back to the total market overview that I've discussed before. I go back to the total market overview. Well, from my understanding on this house appears to be, based on the numbers I run, even the condition it's in, looks like it's priced correctly at the 175. Okay? In today's market, typically buyers are buying a house on average for only 2% less than this price when they're priced correctly. The offer that we're looking at making is more than 20% below what supposedly is the right market price. If you were the seller of this property and an offer came in 20% below, what would your response be? Yeah, be rejection. Okay, so depending on how much you really want this house, 20% below may be a little bit lower than we might go in initially. I understand wanting to make an offer less. Okay, but in a hot market, where the property is moving, we want to get this under contract before it goes into a multiple offer situation. They end up offering more than 175. So where do you think we need to start a little bit closer than 155 we're talking about? Okay, goes back to motivation, timing. If we could get all, let me ask you this: if all those repairs were done, in other words, the roof was taken care of, would you pay the 175? Sure. Because do you think a roof is going to cost $20,000 for your offers? Okay. Because my role is to get the buyer what?
Yes.
The best house, for the best price, for the best time, the best terms. Okay? What does best mean?
But it's good for the buyer.
Okay, good for the buyer, maybe.
It's relative
It's relative to what?
to what the goals are.
Relative to their goals and relative to what?
The needs.
To the market.
To the market.
Oh.
If that home at 175 would sell every single day in that condition in Greenville, and that's the best price we could possibly get for that buyer, that is the best price they're going to get. I've done my job. But I have to determine whether that's the best price. So if you've done the research, it appears to be market value for the condition it's in, that's where you've got to take your client to get them emotionally and logically on the same page as you. Now, if they don't want the house and really walk away from it, that's fine. But if they indicate that they really do want this house, then we've got to start using the power of persuasion to prepare them that if we go in at 155, it's probably going to get outright rejected. They're probably going to tick off the seller. They're going to be less likely to negotiate. Even if you come back with a stronger offer, they're going to be less likely to negotiate with you at that point because you came in so low. So we need to be more market realistic in terms of our offer. Okay? Any other questions you might ask them? If you're familiar with the loan process, what if we could buy this house with a 203K, none of the money has to come for the repairs out of your pocket. Then we'll negotiate the lowest price possible, but we'll change the type of financing you're using. So again, you get all those things done, but it doesn't have to come out of your pocket. Would that work for you? Okay. All right, then presenting. Move into the negotiation process by starting your current offer to the co-op agent, listening to the response. Again, this is where I go back to my recommendation is before you write the offer, before you present an offer to your seller, go back to the co-op agent and get as much information about why they're making the offer they're making, what's more important for their client, Not that we're going to guarantee that you're going to get that, but I can't present it to my client if I don't know what's important to your client. Because most likely, you're going to get a counter offer back. For us to make a counter offer that's more likely to be accepted by your client, I need to know where your client's coming from. Does that make sense to you? Great. So I've got 3, 4, 5, or 6 questions that I need to ask you. All right. Pay attention to nonverbal cues. If you're presenting this offer to your client, to the agent on the other side, if you're on the phone, it's going to be, y'all remember that Verizon commercial? Okay. You ask a question and you think you're being funny, and all of a sudden there's dead silence on the phone because you asked a question about the other person's life. And, yeah, and they didn't hear anything at all. The line was dead. You know, if you ask a question on the phone and it's dead silence on the other end, is that an emotional cue? Yeah, you probably said something you probably shouldn't have said. It's hard to reel those words back in. But if you are paying attention to nonverbal cues, tone of their voice, how rapidly or slowly they speak, are they calm and collected, or are they starting to get emotional on the phone? Or if you're face to face and you see their posture change a little bit, you may want to think about the way you just presented that information. Once you present the offer, keep quiet. And that's with your client or it's with the other side. Because what's the old saying? He who speaks first loses. Okay? And we can't have a win-win if somebody's going to lose. So just keep quiet for a minute, let it sink in. When they're prepared, they'll ask a question or they'll make a point of context. All right? Listen carefully to what's important to the other party. When you're asking this question, it's really not that you're going to give them that, but my saying is you got to know the rules of the game to play at a high level. And part of the rules of the game are what rules they're bringing to the table as well as what rules you're bringing to the table. So the more you can engage them in that conversation about what's important to them and their client, the better off you have a chance to come to a win-win negotiation. Stay calm and relaxed. Keep the emotion in check. Work the mechanics of the transaction. I can't say that enough times. Emotion breaks up more negotiation than anything else, even the terms that you're trying to negotiate. And then focus on the customer's needs. Isolate the objections. Anytime your seller or your buyer or the agent on the other side has an objection, focus in on, let's get to the real objection. Because sometimes the first thing they say is just the surface. And when you start digging down a little bit more, for instance, okay, we get an offer on a house. I contact the buyer's agent. I say, okay, I'm going over the terms of your offer. Just want to clarify some things. You know, we're listed at, let's just say 150. I see that your offer is coming at 140. Tell me a little bit about why the offer is at 140. You know, we think we have it priced very well. Did you do a CMA? Did you do the market research? How is it you came up with this price to offer? And then I'm quiet. I just wait for responses. Okay? And then based on the response, they may say something like, well, you know, we've run the numbers, and we're not saying we're anywhere close to 150. Now, my wife does have a little bit more emotion in her than I have in me. She might get her gander up, and how dare you challenge my numbers? I know I'm right about this price. Okay, she might take that tact. Not so much these days as she did in the beginning. So instead of reacting, what do you think the approach is? Say it louder.
Remain calm.
Remain calm.
Just present the information.
Present the information.
Listen.
Listen. Say, well, I might ask the question, well, since you did say that you ran a CMA and you think that we're at the 140 range, would you mind sending me a copy of your CMA? And I'd be willing to send you a copy of my CMA. Maybe we can figure out, you know, where we've got this gap of $10,000. Would you be open to that? Now, if they say, no, 140 is it, where is that leading me in this conversation? They're posturing to stand firm where they're at. Now, again, I'm not going to get emotional, okay? But I am going to ask the question, So it sounds to me like if we can't come to terms with this $10,000 gap, your buyer is willing to move on. Is that what I'm hearing? Is it 140? Is 140 or nothing? Is that what we're saying? What do you think the agent on the other side is going to say? They might say, yeah. Am I going to react to that? No. I'm going to go, okay, now that I know where you stand, let me go present your offer to the seller and we'll see what comes back. Okay? Now, if the seller is willing to walk away from an offer that low, we'll walk away. We'll just flat out reject it. Now, what do you think the agent on the other side is going to say when we come back and say, sellers decided to reject your offer? What do you think they're going to say?
Oh, higher.
In other words, now we get emotional, okay? I went based on facts. You indicated that 140 was the highest your buyer wanted to go. I gave that information. The seller's rejecting your offer. Now all of a sudden we're going to find out whether that's really what the buyer was thinking or not, okay? Now, is that the only tack to take there? No, but sometimes you have to take that tack. Based on what? Based on your client's tolerance for negotiations. Remember when we said you need to understand what your client is willing to do, what's their intestinal fortitude level in terms of negotiation, how flexible do they want to be, how hard and fast do they want to be. That's why it's important to know that question. If you find yourself in that scenario, understanding how your client wants you to posture negotiate is equally important as knowing what's important to the other side in terms of negotiation. Okay? Because sometimes you may have to use that out of your tool bag to be a little more hard and fast and gruff to get that contract negotiated, to get those parties back to a meeting of the minds, to get to a point where you do get a win-win. It initially starts as, if you get what you want, it's a win for you, a loss for me, and if I get what I want, that's important. Okay? That's how it always starts out. Getting them to get to a win-win, sometimes you have to work through the posture and keep bringing them back to the table together. All right. Verbal cues. What kind of verbal cues can people give you? Verbal. Smile. Well, verbal.
Right. Tonality.
Tonality.
Volume,
Volume.
pace.
Pace, the speed at which they talk. You know, when they start getting antsy or excited, they talk a lot faster. Okay? When they stay calm and collected, they talk a little bit slower. So you got to be able to pick up on those, especially if you talk on the phone all the time. You very rarely do things face to face. Now, how many of you in here prefer to text or email over talk on the phone or face to face?
I do it.
How do you put tone in a text? All caps. Which really throws me off if they have the caps lock on when they're typing it. The whole paragraph is in caps. I'm like, oh my God! But you have to realize, okay, if you're using that as a form of communication, people can misinterpret on the other side what you meant. It happens all the time. Okay? You need to be cognizant of that. So if you typically do that, and you put something in all caps, you might want to put in parentheses, all caps for emphasis. Important. All caps. Important. Okay? But again, there's going to be verbal cues that people are going to give you. All right? Now, what about the visual cues? Smile.
Posture.
Head shaking, agreement. Posture. You know, are they kind of leaning forward during the conversation, or they kind of sit back? Are they crossed armed, they kind of closed off, or they kind of relaxed and open to conversation?
Eye contact. Eye contact.
Eye contact.
And movement.
Eye contact and movement. Okay. Do you remember the cues, right or left? Which one means what?
If you look up and to the left or down to the right, I don't.
To the left or right? Right.
Okay. So if you're looking up to the left, you're kind of thinking, okay, what can I say that's going to get the response that I want? And if you're looking up to the right, it's typically you're trying to recall something. So recall information. So I believe you're right. Up and to the left, You may want to question what they're telling you. Up and to the right, it's just recall. Okay. All right. All right, let's talk about cultural aid. Y'all work with a lot of different cultures here? Some? Okay. I understand that there are some cultural differences. Not right or wrong. That's what you have to remember. It's not right or wrong. And I understand that you can take the tact of, all right, this is the United States. Everything should be written in English. Okay? Everything should be negotiated in English. Everything should be done the way we do it in the United States, not the way their country does it. But the reality is that in the best interest of your client? I always go back to that. Okay? The compass that I use for making decisions as to how to negotiate or act or behave or do anything is how I'm doing this in the best interest of my client, is in the best interest of my business, and is in the best interest of coworkers who I work with. If I get a yes for all of those, probably a good decision. If I get a no on any one of those, I'll start questioning whether I'm really going to go that direction or not. There are going to be some cultural differences. My experience, I'm not saying this in a biased way, I'm just saying this is my experience. Indian and Asian cultures, tough negotiators. Tough negotiators. It is we have to win. Okay? It is. You can concede to something that I'm giving you, but I'm going to come back to one more thing just so I can put the knife and dagger in, because that's how we do things. Not right or wrong, it's just the way they approach things. Okay? There are other cultures that it's much more free fluid, flowing, flexible work, and when they have somebody on the other side, you feel like they're always conceding. Okay? And sometimes not to their benefit. You just have to understand that. So culturally, what kind of differences have you seen in terms of what you've experienced? Do you have any examples?
Chinese, pinching pennies, demanding, using anger to make a point.
Okay.
They're very, very passionate about it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Middle Eastern, it never ends. You don't know what they want, what they're saying.
Yeah, because I mean, in some cultures, giving too much information is seen as weakness.
Yeah.
Okay, so you've always got to have this information that you're holding back. Otherwise, you're seen as weak. You just need to understand that. So if you're going to be working potentially in a culturally diverse area, be aware that it's not all done the way we do it in the United States. It's not all done the way you do it. And your job is to represent your client. Sometimes represent your client means that you need to be a little more flexible. You need to be a little more hard-nosed. Or you need to be a little more demanding. That's what it calls for. Just be aware there are some constant tendencies like that. Now, here's some things that you may run into. Nibbling. This drives me nuts. Okay. Once your client has agreed upon one of the major concessions, the other party starts nibbling away and asking for additional smaller concessions. Okay? So you can stop nibbling from happening to you by nibbling back. Remember we talked about early on, negotiation about give and take. So great, if you really need this $5,000 in closing costs, we're happy to accommodate you for that. With a full price offer, you can finance all of your prepays. That'll help you out. Because you said that's what was most important to you. Okay? Or, well, that window, those windows are, they really have to be replaced. We're an as-is offer. Those windows, they have to be replaced. All right, we'll agree to replace those windows. Here's what we need from you in order to do that. Otherwise, every time they ask for something else, you ask for something in return. Eventually, what will happen is they'll get tired of it, and they'll stop asking for those additional items. Okay? Hot potato. The other party tries to pass the problem on to you. For example, the co-op agent tries to pass all closing costs to your client because their client can't afford it. Throw it back. Test the validity. Find out if it's really a problem. Has the party with the problem exhausted every solution? In other words, do they really have to have these $5,000 closing costs? The example we're using. Great, we can finance it. Pay full price to finance Pay higher than full price for financing. Bring them a little bit closer to find out if it's real or not. Good guy, bad guy. Two people working together, husband and wife, take opposing roles. Y'all ever dealt with that? Husband and wife act differently. Husband and wife want something different. They're not married if they don't, trust me. Okay? So, sometimes you have to call them on their game. In other words, you can even say, come on, you're not going to play good guy, bad guy, are you? Because that's what they'll do. You're in a negotiation. You come up with a solution. Husband kind of sees the logic behind it, is willing to go with it. And maybe the wife is just adamant, no, I am not buying this house unless they take care of that. Or the complete opposite. Sometimes the husband will take that tack. I know darn well I've done these kind of repairs myself. I know they're not worth more than this amount, and they just go up. And the wife's like, just calm down. Okay? We're only talking a couple $100 here. It's not a big deal. We want to move on. Okay? And they come at it that way. Sometimes you have to take that tact. Really, I haven't seen this since I watched the whole episode of Cops, where it was good cop, bad cop. You guys sound just like that program I used to watch. Okay? Lighten it up a little bit. Get them back into reality. All right, last but not least, positioning. Positioning is about moving parties closer to each other until you have a full agreement. That is what negotiation is. How many of you have ever had offer come in, no negotiation at all, accepted, no negotiation of repairs, went to closing, closed, was never ever an issue with that transaction? Nobody. There are always points of difference. Okay? So the job is really bringing them closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And how you approach it is what will get you that way. Okay? So acknowledge the common ground. Sounds like we're right on point in terms of price. My sellers agree to sell at that price, your buyers willing to buy at that price. But here's where the difference is. The amount of closing costs that you're asking for. So we've got some really good foundation here to start with. What's the best way we can move in terms of these closing costs? Is your buyer willing to pay a little bit more and finance a little bit of the closing costs? I might be able to, if they're willing to do that, I might be able to get the seller to come off the fence a little bit, to offer a little bit in closing costs if your buyer's willing to finance a little bit. How's that sound? Okay? Sounds like we're right on. We've agreed to a couple of these repairs that need to be done that are important to your buyer. But this one, my seller's not willing to concede on. How can we work through that issue? What's the buyer willing to give on it? That's important, are they willing to give up on something else in order to get that one? So keep coming back to the points that we have in common, that we agreed to, keep referencing those, and then say, now what do we do to move this on? Ask what and how questions to get a better understanding. Does that make sense? How do you know what they want if you don't ask them? How do they know what you want if you don't tell them? I mean, that's a two-way street. If you take the tack that the more you know, the more you can help that negotiation move forward. Be willing to be open yourself to answering those questions as well. Not to the detriment of your client. Understand, I'm not saying that. Your role is to negotiate on their behalf. If you've had that conversation, I recommend that you have very early on in your relationship with them about their tolerance level, about how strong a negotiator they want you to be, or how amenable they want you to be. That will be your guidance to what you can answer and not answer, or how open you're going to be or how closed you're going to be.
Sometimes asking them questions helps them understand what they want.
Exactly, exactly. And especially repeating it back to them. I mean, repeating it back and saying, so this is what I heard you say. It's more important for you not to move to Chicago if you can't get this price for your house. Is that what you're saying? Well, no, I need to get to Chicago. Okay, so getting to Chicago is more important than getting that exact price. There may be a little more flexibility there with it than what you initially indicated. Does that make sense? Sometimes you have to challenge them that way to find out exactly what they truly need. Okay? All right. I'm not going to have you role play this, but I'm going to take the last 15 minutes just to kind of open the floor to any questions. If anybody's online has a question and they want to text Jennifer or text Alan while he's here in the room, you can ask your question and we'll answer it aloud. But what do you think are your biggest challenges to negotiate that you need to work through?
Coming from curiosity.
Coming from curiosity? Great point. Yeah. Clear understanding of what's important to the other parties will help you approach it, not to the detriment of your client. Again, it's not what it's about, but about presenting it in a way that maybe you have a counter strategy now that you know what's important to them. What else? Do you have a scenario you want to work through? Some tough negotiation that you had?
I know now, when personal property is wanted, you have to do an addendum to the contract because lenders will not accept personal property, except for foster guards.
Right.
The draperies have to be on something separate. And so that, I love that up.
But you do. I mean, you make mistakes and you learn through them. That's why I recommend journaling. Run through those things. If you do them 2 or 3 times the same way, yeah, that's just you really weren't thinking.
Yeah.
But if you have that experience, you can learn from it. You adjust it the next time or adapt it next time. Take a different approach. It helps you work through this. That's a learning experience. Well,
The sellers of their house in Greenville now live in Washington State. The house is occupied by an undetermined number of Middle Eastern of the same family.
okay.
Typically, always in the Would it be possible to understand what their finances are if they're not able to qualify for financing?
Okay.
The seller's best chance of minimizing their loss or maybe coming out whole is selling it to this Middle Eastern family. They're strange. I'm highly suspicious. Nevertheless, they haven't missed it.
Okay.
I think they ought to consider taking back financing and financing the house for a year until the family until their electronic cigarette business is established itself well enough to get financing.
Okay.
So
what's
how
the
do I
question?
talk to the seller?
I would approach it from, okay, what ultimately is the goal that you have with this property? Do you want to dispose of it, or do you want to keep it and hold on to it as a rental until the market comes back, or until there's a more qualified buyer? Which of those options is a better option?
No, I don't want to do that. I want to sell it now at a price which will get me out of debt.
Okay, at a price which will get it out.
Get me out of debt in time. Pay the mortgage, so I can go to the table and I'll break even or take money.
So let me put that conversation aside and talk to you as an agent. What's the true value of the property in today's market? Can he sell it in a hurt condition?
Yeah.
Okay, so what has to be done for him to get it to a sale price that will work for him?
I don't think he can. I don't think the seller will see a price. I mean, there's lots that can be done in this. This is a nice house.
Okay.
But the market is not going to support. They made a mistake when they bought the house.
Okay.
And now they're asking the buyer, potential buyers, to help hold them, to make them whole for the mistake they made in 2009.
Okay. Okay. So the way we might approach that, so if I understand right, number one priority is to sell this house at a price which allows you to walk away owing nothing. In other words, you're not willing to, if selling this house meant you had to bring money to the table, are you willing to do that?
They would say no.
Okay, so, all right, so I'm just trying to gather the facts so I can make a recommendation to you, talking agent to seller. All right, so selling it at a loss is not an option. All right, so if selling it at a price that would allow you to walk away without bringing money to the table is not an option in today's market, what's plan B? Continue to rent it until the market comes back? And is that a better option than putting money into it to sell it? It's your choice. It's your house.
Mm-hmm.
So is continuing to rent it, the best option for you, if that's what the market dictates, or is the option to put money into it a little more appealing so you can be done? Which would you prefer?
Yeah. And she's very frightened and doesn't want to continue to rent to the folks. The folks that live in there now, they're fine. They don't leave it alone. They maintain the place beautiful.
Okay. Well, then what you need to do is you need to show them, okay, of those two options, renting, is there a benefit to you? There's a tax break on it, because you get to claim off your mortgage interest and your taxes. Okay. They're maintaining the property very well, so it's better to have a property that's being maintained than a vacant property with nothing in there. Your house is going to deteriorate faster without anybody living in it. Okay, so I'm going to take you back. Your only two options at this point are sell it and bring money to the table, or continue to rent it. If that's your only two options, which one would be your choice? See, they're not going to want to answer that question, but that's what they have to do, because that may be their own choices. I'll give you an example. We listed a property in 2010, and that was at a real downturn in the market in Raleigh. This woman had overpaid for the property as well. They were an expired listing. They had listed like 285. The market bill justified was about 260. What we saw the numbers at. So we listed the property, listed it. Actually, we did list the property initially. They went with another agent for 30 days at 275. Wasn't selling, getting no activity. They called us back and said, we think we made a mistake in listing with this other agent because they're doing nothing to market our house. To which we said, look, we can't even have a conversation with you until you're no longer working with that other agent. When it expires, happy to talk to you. They ended up terminating the listing and hiring us to list it. We listed it at 265, which was 5,000 below what we really wanted to list it at. The market was still going down. We were trying to get them below the market. Long story short, never sold. She decided to rent it because she was already living out of state. Okay. Come around 3 years later, they got a renter in the property. 3 really large dogs. Right. $18,000 of damage to this property. Yeah. Now the price has come up since then, right? But the price had come up to what originally was top end of the market at that time, 270 to 275. We got them to list it at 270. Got 2 offers within 3 days. They ended up selling it at 273. They financed 3,000 closing costs for the seller, for the buyer. But they had to make a decision, and it was that. Do you want to continue renting it? Now, by the way, let's take that choice. If you continue to rent it, you already have substantial money that needs to be put into it just to get it back up to where we can rent it. If you do that, the potential is year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, guess what you have to do again? Put more money into the property. All right, so that's option A. Option B is you put the money into the property, get it up to good condition that we can sell it today, and maybe in 30 to 60 days, you don't have that burden. So those are your only 2 choices. Which one sounds more appealing to you? Exact same scenario. Difference was it was destroyed while the renter was in it. They chose to put the money into it. They actually ended up putting close to 20,000 into it. But we got them what we told them to sell it in a relatively short amount of time. No mortgage payments, they're done with it, it's closed, it's done, they moved on with their life. So you really have to kind of put it to them in that perspective. You know, based on the information you've given me, based on what I've learned, market knowledge of what's going on in the market right now, you have door A or you have door B. It's your house, not my house. You just need to make a choice and give me directions which way you want to go. I'm fine with either one of those choices. What's it going to be? They don't want to make a decision because they're afraid to make a wrong decision.
When are you going to do a class in negotiations?
When do you want one? I mean, this is kind of what we're doing now. I mean, is negotiating a win. So, but part of that is you just have to be willing to make them make the decision. And that's the challenge. Is they want you to make the decision for them so that they can make you fall back. It's their house. Man. What? Any other questions? All right. So my question for you is, before we leave, give one thing you got out of this class that you're glad you came before.
Is to, instead of calling the selling agent to find out if the house is available, also get as much information you can.
Good point.
To prepare.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The due diligence, the additional earnest money.
Okay. Now I have some clarification. I have had a couple of listing agents kind of balk at that about wanting the earnest money up front. I have that same conversation. I go to, I have them say, I have them describe to me. I ask the question the same way I asked you, what's earnest money for? Now it's amazing the number of agents that are like dead silent on the other end of the phone. That's a silly question. What do you mean by that? I go, what's earnest money for? Contractually, what does it do? It is the seller's recourse if the buyer breaches the contract, right? And they go, yeah. I go, and at what point can the buyer breach the contract? Well, they can breach at any time. No, that's not quite right. Up until the end of due diligence, they can walk away for any reason or no reason. That's not a breach. Contractually, they're given that right to do that. So until the end of due diligence, they can't breach the contract. So why do you need the earnest money up front? And what do I typically hear? That's the way we've always done it. We've always got earnest money. Well, guess what? This is a new contract as of 2011. It's not done that way anymore. And they kind of concede. Okay. Now, from a seller's perspective, the only challenge that I think is somewhat legitimate is because I always put due diligence date. I put effective date plus 30 days because that date can sometimes change if you're negotiating an offer. On the due diligence additional earnest money, I put due diligence date plus 1 day. I don't put an exact date. I put due diligence period plus 1 day. The only balk I've gotten at that is that, well, what if 1 day after the due diligence period your buyer refuses to give me the earnest money? That's the only legitimate excuse to that. So you could put due diligence in the due diligence period. 5 o'clock that day, the check is due. That's fine. Does that make sense? I think that could be a legitimate concern, but if you have control of your clients and you got the check already, you're just going to, in other words, I always get the additional earnest money, cashier's check, right? Can't be a personal check, additional earnest money. So I always have them, the day due diligence is ending, put a check, a cashier's check, for the additional earnest money in my hand before due diligence. And then if they move forward with the contract, it's delivered. If they decide before 5 o'clock, we're not doing this, I give them that check back. And I let the other agent know that. I've got the check in my hand. Okay? Okay? What other tips did you learn?
Inviting the other side to own the position.
Yeah, good point. Anybody else? Everybody's got to give you one before we leave. Come on, Alan, go ahead.
When you receive an offer that might be lower than what you want, to contact the other agent and try to figure out maybe what the situation is so you can create a win-win.
Yeah. Now, that works both ways. Sheila and I made an offer for one of our buyers. I mean, I am really a numbers person. My total market overview, if a house is priced correctly, it should have sold in our market in a certain amount of time. If it hasn't, chances are it's overpriced. So we go check numbers before we write the offers. So Sheila is really good at numbers. She does a great competitive CMA. If you want a CMA class, put Sheila over for CMA class.
Right.
Yeah. Just have to figure out how your what software you're going to use for it class. You have to have somebody walk through that first. But anyway, so the house was listed at 250. We really felt 203 was a stretch. And we felt confident it might appraise at 203. 205 is stretching it. Higher than 205 really was, in our opinion, out of the question. So when we presented the offer, I called the agent on the other side, and we got in that conversation about pricing. And I go, well, our initial offer is going to be considerably lower than your 215. Out of curiosity, how did you come up with 215,000 for the list price? And honest to God, this was the response. There were 3 other active listings out there. We picked the lowest one, and we went $500 below them. I guess so. You didn't actually do a CMA to see what had sold and look at what features your house had versus what that house had, and came up with a price that may be legitimate for our market. I had specifically said that price is legitimate for our market. And it was, no, honestly, I did. I go, would you mind if we send you a copy of our CMA to show you what our analysis is? I think that'll soften the blow in terms of what our offer is going to be when we make it. Would it be okay if we did that? And we did. And this is what happened. They took our CMA to the seller and said, I can't argue with these numbers, and they accepted our offer at 203. Sometimes you have to do that, is get in that conversation.
Asking lots of questions.
Absolutely. That is the key to negotiation. I mean, that's an old saying. The reason you have 2 ears and 1 mouth is so you listen twice as much as you talk. Okay? That's the reality of negotiations, is you have to ask lots of questions. And I realize we're recording this real estate commission bottom line, are they? I know God's listening to me, so here's the thing. One of the other reasons that I ask lots of questions on the other side is because not all agents are intelligent enough not to answer them. Now let me qualify that, okay? I've asked the question, Jennifer, seen your house has been on the market about 30 days. Any chance you've had any other offers between now and then? Say yes. Okay. Out of curiosity, it appears that they weren't able to negotiate those. Why wasn't the seller open to taking those other offers? I had an agent tell me this. Well, we're at 250 and the offer came in at 205 and my seller just wouldn't take the offer at 205. I went, okay, well, what about the 205 was the seller not interested in? Oh, it just pissed them off up front. Okay, so have you had any other offers? Yeah, we had another one come in at 205 and he didn't accept that one. So what do I automatically know about the seller at this point?
He's not really
Yeah, not going to take the low ball off. So then I asked the question, so out of curiosity, why are they selling? And they said, well, they're going through a divorce right now. They're really aging. And the one just wants to sell at all costs. And the other just wants to piss the other one off and won't accept any kind of offers. And I just kept going on with this conversation. Okay? It was amazing the information got out. Now, I'm not going to tell you how that negotiation went, but my point is, you never know what questions are going to answer until you ask them. And sometimes they will give you the piece of information you need to go get that offer accepted, if you just continue to ask enough questions. Okay? I mean, I actually had an agent tell me one time, if we could get an offer of this, the seller would take it. Now, do you think I'm going to offer anything higher than that? No. You actually came in a little bit lower than that and ended up there. Okay? And my buyer was ecstatic because they got the price much lower than what the purchase price was. It's amazing what the agents, if they don't think about the question you just asked them, what comes out of their mouth. Once it comes out of their mouth, what's your obligation to your client? You got to share it. That's your job. Okay? So ask lots of questions. You never know what you're going to get answered until you ask it. All right, Alan, what's yours?
Built prior to 78.
Built prior to 78. Yeah.
That's news to me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually some cool stuff. There's as a broker charge, I belong to that group that is with NCAR, their legal program. So there's a blog out there that you puts questions all the time. Some of it's actually hilarious. Some of it's actually good questions. I was like, wow, I didn't even think of that one. So we continue to put some of those things out. So if you want to get that set up in your office.
Yes.
All right. There's no other questions. I appreciate you all coming.
Thank
You
you.
can join us next week. Very good. Bro, did you have that certified negotiation?
Get from house.
No, they didn't have gold right now.
I've watched some